Indeed, it is a very interesting topic of among very many topics which came with the introduction of the new procurement law, EU law, and I'm pretty sure it will take us many years to fully find out where we will end up with the life cycle costing tool. Let's have a bit of a look where we all started from. I wanted to give you a bit of the origin where it all stems from. The introduction of life costing in the directive, articles 67, 68. Quite interesting, more than in the part we have doubled now the regulatory framework because we have now 2 articles for that. The cost types, the calculation methods, and a bit on the outlook. Let me start with some remarks. I fully believe in life costing analysis as such. I think it's the only way for public procurement authorities, for contractors, for procurers to find out really, and we had a lot of very great discussions this morning already. I mean, but it's not only in IT and energy, but in practically all, to see what is really what you want to achieve economically, what you want to achieve budgetary-wise, what you want to achieve also with your expectation on quality, that you know what does it cost and you put the elements together. So it's in such, and I mean, who I am, you are much more experienced than I do because you have done a lot of calculations prior to procurement yourself. The basic issue is always 2 things. Keep it simple and stupid in cost analysis and life cycle analysis, and also have got the right data prepared. And we actually have been very honest to what is going into the calculation as such. The second remark I would like to do is probably more of a political one. Well, we should never forget where our procurement law, the EU procurement law, and potentially also the national procurement law stems from. There are mainly 2, let's say, origins, bases, rates. The one is definitely the budgetary. I mean, you need to know what can you buy with your budget resources, with your public resources. And the key, therefore, is always, to a certain degree, what is the right price? What is the price? What you can afford. The second is, of course, the competition. You want to have best quality for your money. And I'd say in our general overrun, our general structure, in our general system, normally it is through competition that we find out what should be the best. As a general remark, and then testing how are we stand now with our new life costing tool. The life costing tool stemming from this is not an invention of the EU Commission or about the EU institutions recently. I think there's a lot of time already passing where life costing tools, as we have got them now in Article 68, are going back forward. I think they originally was the idea to have a bit more evidence-based and policy-making background to procurement. Big issue, very positive issue, is of course that you wanted to have more green procurement. Green procurement in the sense to have a more quality with regard to procurement processes and the outcome and the products and the services you buy. And you want also to have a certain formula through the use of technology. So these are the basic origins which came, let's say, to the lawmakers and say, look, I mean, we have to improve here our system. What is critical is, of course, the discussion about hidden costs in this context. So costs affecting any kind of procurer which comes probably after the procurement has been made, meaning again, services or products. So you buy a product, and I think even as a private consumer, we can see and find out very quickly. You buy a very relatively cheap one, or a cheap one, probably the cheapest one, and then in due course you find out it is either not very helpful, it doesn't fulfill your quality standards you set yourself, or you have got huge trouble simply by getting rid of it, in the sense of that you have more cost probably in the afterwards than you would have in having chosen a more costly product at the very beginning. But this is all also in the context, as I just made my original remarks, in the context of your budget, because I mean it is part of your budget to deal with the product or the services you have received, and you have to see a bit the future of this. The directive has changed a bit now this kind of background, because they brought in an issue which we talk later on specifically in the cost-costing tool, and these are the externalities. So in addition to your budgetary issues, the hidden costs connected to this, we have now, if we use the life costing tool, we have also to look at the externalities, so which are not immediately connected to the purchase or the service request as such. And there is a bit the difficulty here, that we got a certain kind of element in which the procurer in the past has not foreseen or has not to take into consideration in the same way they probably have to do it in the future or are currently using the life costing tool. And these externalities, we have to see how we deal with this. Let us go back a bit to the background. What is a typical example for externalities? And please, Philip, step always in when I see something nonsense, because you have got a huge background to specifically that there's that. CO2 emissions of a mobile phone, if we just crack that down to a certain degree. You have got gray emissions, of course, when you start to produce a mobile phone. And here I made already a kind of question mark when you start shipping it from wherever it comes. And we know, for instance, that a lot of mobile phones using ourselves come from Asia and they have to be transported here. We can say transport costs in reality are relatively low, but if you see the amount of transport shipments done from Asia, you can definitely ask yourself, what is that on the CEO level, what has to be brought? Would it be not, let's say, CO2 more relevant if we would have products produced in Europe in the near vicinity than up to Asia? Then, of course, you have got the usage phase emissions. Let's say we have got a general usage of 2 or 3 years. Also that we can more or less, until to the common standard, I'm not an expert at this, but I have been told that you can evaluate this. And then again, the last phase of a product and the last phase of a publicly procured phone is the disposal. And here, at least I couldn't find, probably, again, correct me if I'm wrong, I couldn't find actually the cost of it. And I think that is a very, very small example here. Imagine if you think about, when we think about now the big change to electrical cars, and think about what do you do with the waste of lithium batteries. I'm not sure if we have got any idea. Probably it will be another super problem carrying out we have got with nuclear power plants. What will happen with lithium batteries in this amount of car production we will have? So if we slice it down, and if you take that projectively in your decision making for procurement, you end up with a lot of question marks. As a procurer, you cannot definitely deal with, because you need to be an expert, and even the experts sometimes do not know all the signs. So, and CO2, just starting with this example as an externality, it's relatively well scientifically analyzed. It's fairly predictable with a part of certain issues. But there are a lot of other externalities, if you take that into account, where you do not have this kind of scientific analysis yet. If you think about sourcing commodities from conflict areas, if you would make that as a kind of issue for your selection. The disposal of toxic materials, I just mentioned lithium batteries, for instance, or the negative impact on health and productivity. A lot of elements come only much, much later. You have probably made your procurement process. So very difficult if you bring in what used to be a pure budgetary process with competition elements in order to get best value for money. You bring in now a lot of issues which you normally do not have under control, and you do not have potentially scientific or analysis data which you can put into account. So that is the confrontation, and I don't want to let it see as a kind of criticism, but at least what the, even if the Commission is praising that, but we should be also fair, we are here in a completely new zone. If we want to keep all these kind of alternatives into account, which bring us probably a bit more away from what used to be public procurement as a part, which was only budgetary control and competition, bringing into the public market. So, when you want to bring the kind of costing tool with these kind of externalities into your game, my recommendation is that you have to make a very, very good analysis what you can control, because in the end of the day, you have to justify it, you have to defend it, you have to probably prove what you put in a later point in time when things might go to court or might go even a kind of review. If you look at Article 68 at the end, it is quite interesting. We wait for the Holy Grail, which might come, what will be the general costing tool in the future. As far as I know, there are a lot of studies and discussions also within the Commission going on in order to define what might be a kind of general tool in the end of the day. As far as I know, my knowledge is there is not yet a definite one. With all the political problems going ahead, I'm question mark how quickly we will have it. So if you look at Article 68, in the end of the day, you have got a kind of open process which you are not having terminated yet, because a tool which is promised there, which is hopefully at what time in that will there, is not yet there. So in this in between, we have to see what is covering the gap. And I'm very happy that Philip Tepper is here, because probably in the discussion later on he can tell us a bit more, because ICLA is one of those who have got, in the meantime, or even going beyond, already developed tools for a life costing model or technology, which I understand it correctly, it's more or less an Excel-based table program with specific formula. And here, and this is by far not conclusive, I've given you a little overview of what kind of tools are currently on the market. But again, you need to analyze what kind of tools of those you take, because there's no general tool yet. It's always specific to certain type of procurements. Again, you have got certain tools which fit only to certain procurements. They might not fit to other procurements. I only can say in the context of PPP projects, I've worked together with much more knowledgeable colleagues than myself to develop specific tools for budgetary reasons, life costing models, in order to find out if the offers you get in are economical or not. And the big issue was always, and is always, what kind of data you produce, but even before you go in it, what kind of cost element you put into it. And it's, again, I think you have certainly done it in your own practice more than once, it's very, very difficult to be concrete. And what I've seen, there can be huge differences in what you thought at the beginning, what probably was in the end. So again, here, the life costing tool, very interesting, but for the time being, as we have no general tool, and this will take some time, we only can help with specific answers, especially from NGOs or from experts who have provided certain tools for certain procurement types. Let's go back now to the law. As I said, I mean, the basis for this is Article 67, 68. And there are a lot of issues with regard to award criteria. And one of them is our life-cycle costing. And if we read once again what is said in Article 67, the most economically advantageous tender from the point of view of the contracting authority shall be identified on the basis of the price or cost using a cost-effectiveness approach such as life-cycle costing. In the end of the day, life-cycle costing is only one element you can use in order to define what is more or less your cost approach with regard to cost-effectiveness approach. So the life cycling, which is then more or less explained in Article 68, is only one of the elements. So Article 67, for your pricing award, or for the award criteria, is not necessarily the only one, but the preferred one as the legislator has put it in. So we are using life cycle costing as a kind of tool, as a kind of mechanism in order to define more precisely the award criteria, or to give a framework to the award criteria with regard to the most economically advantageous tender. So it has to be seen in this context, but as we can interpret from the legislation, it is not the only one. And here a bit the difficulty starts. We have got the three awarding options: price or costly only, the quality only, or the combination of price and quality. And my theory is that there is a kind of overlap between the price or costly and the quality only due to our mechanism with regard to the life cycle costing. Because due to the externalities which are put into the system of life costing tool, there might be a certain overlap with quality on quality only too. Let us go further and have a look now in Article 68. So we have got these two elements who should be covered by life costing tools. The first are the hidden costs. And I think here, the contracting authority, the procurer, is, from my point of view, absolutely in the driving seat, because you can find out yourself more or less easily what might be cost elements relating to the acquisition itself, the cost of use and consumption of the maintenance cost, and end-of-life cost, because of the own experiences in-house. So if you have got a follow-up procurement based on the experience you have got with your previous procurements, you have a very good idea, mainly, you have to have a very good idea, especially with regard to budgetary reasons, what were really the costs, so you can identify that. So hidden cost is simply one has to put your own matrix together and then fill it in. But then there is, in Article 68, the second element, and this is the environmental externalities, which are linked to the product, service, or work during its life cycle. And here, what I mentioned earlier, the problematic issue, from my point of view, start because these externalities you are not always in control of, because you have even a lack of data or a lack of quite often scientific background. When we look into detail furthermore what the legislation is providing us with, we see also that certain costs are not reflected in. So, with regard to the hidden costs and direct costs, there is a lacuna with regard to insurance costs or taxes of ownership. And then the question also starts, what is linked to the product or to the service of this kind of not evaluated cost there and what not? I would say insurance is a very good example because insurance contract might cover much more than you actually your product or the service level because you have got the general insurance. But potentially it might be also thought of that you can quantify certain elements of the insurance, at least part of the insurance calculation, and add this to the hidden costs as well. Externalities, what is this? So everything which is modelizing and monetizing exercise. And what we know, these externalities which I discussed currently is, of course, climate change, human health, ecosystem, and resources. These are the externalities, at least as far as I can judge, the legislator had got in mind when they're bringing it in. So, where you stand now when you draft your award criteria, and you want to use the life cycle costing tool, you will see that you have got a situation of choice. You do not have to bring in, or you can have more elements for effectiveness testing your meat tender, your meat process, than with the live costing. It's only one tool. Secondly, we have the situation that Article 68 gives the framework but has not the general tool at hand, so you have, in addition, to make a choice of tools which are currently on the market, so to speak. And you have to be, in order to cover all this, you have to be very diligent in analyzing first your hidden cost and also your external utilities, because as they are award criteria, they can be brought to court, and you have to prove, and you have to very clearly state what you have put into that. So you need a kind of high level of diligence in the development or in the bringing forward of the life costing element, because as we heard this morning already on IT, there are sometimes very, very diligent questions to be made with regard to the award criteria as such. There is as far as I can see, a kind of general tendency. Even the national, in the national implementation was made in some member states, but most member states or the officials more and more believe that the life costing cycle tool is too complex and is too vague to be used in practice. I only can give you an example of my own. We just working in one significant transaction in the infrastructure side according to the new law, and I have to say deliberately we have left it after long discussions out because it was simply too vague for the time being, or let's say the procurer was not courageous enough, let's say in this way, to use it because there were too many questions at that point in time. Doesn't mean for the future, but at that point in time, especially with regard to externalities, it was not regarded as robust as sufficiently to say we can go with it. And nobody wants to end up in the end of the day in court, like we just had this discussion during our break, like Wienstrom, you'll be very innovative, you'll be very forward-thinking, you were very inventive, but you end up in the European Court of Justice. Not every procurer wants to have this kind of coming out. You want to get your procurement through, you want to have it done and you want to have no problems with it in court. If we see where the low costing cycle tool can, where the life cycle costing tool can work, where we have got a kind of general tool applicable, relatively easy to use, is in the Clean Vehicles Directive, in the annex there. There you have really a kind of more or less tested by the legislator, if you so want, an overview to use it, where you can say, well, this is the standard we have to bring forward. That has also to be I guess in all the member states by now, have been transposed and implemented. And we have got XL2 specific products group for set out by certain general procurer for IT equipment. So if I would like to advise you on a procurement stream, I would definitely go for those who are either accepted by legislation or by common practice through, let's say, a kind of framework on the public side. All the other tools, good to have them, but I cannot say that they are tested yet. So, what is the end of this? I think we will have to see that, first of all, the Commission at the first rank, but also then later on the legislator, come up with the general tool in order to broaden and give you more legal certainty in future. So not the test and trial and error situation, but really I think the basis for bringing forward is that we have got a framework that is accepted and not only these kind of islands which we have currently. One has also to see, and I said, look, there's a certain overlap between price-cost analysis due to the externalities and quality. Because certain issues you potentially ask with regard to externalities, with regard to life cycle costing, you could also definitely put into the criteria of quality. We had already a discussion about labeling. Well, I'm not saying I'm pro or con about it. Again, there are also very similar discussion points here. But in the end of the day, one has to make a very good evaluation on where do you want to put in. What is your vision with your award criteria where you want to put it in? And you have to be very clear when you put it in the one side and you want to have it in the other side. My biggest problem, personally speaking, with externalities is it is really not a budgetary issue. It is politics bringing to award criteria. As much as that, it is of course, public authorities have also to fulfill political approaches. That's clear. But if it's the right way to do it in this format, so life cycle costing, I have a bigger question mark. Because especially when we look at the externalities, here again, climate change, human health, ecosystem, resources, I'm not so sure that you can really evaluate that on the costing side now. Very, very difficult. So coming up with a kind of by wrapping our three questions. Who really feels competent to work with these tools? Do we have sufficient guidance? I don't know it. I mean, from my point, as a poor lawyer, I have to say I'm not so sure that we have. The second issue, which comes as, of course, the matrix you have to put in, and then you have got the data. Well, it really has to be seen in court how you can prove the rightness of your data. Especially under a condition where you are not the master of the data. You cannot provide them yourself. Hidden cost, you have got a choice. You have got a certain amount of control over it, but externalities, you do not have. but they can make the difference of a win or not win. So when you use life cycle costing, it's definitely needed and requested to have a kind of costing cycle tool for yourself, for your evaluation. If you bring in externalities, you have to be pretty sure that your matrix and your data are using have got a certain standard, where there's of course legislation, for instance, like the clean vehicle. From my point of view, it's a no-brainer. If you don't have that with other issues, make a question mark and really think for yourself as a procurer, do I have control over that? Can I justify and can I prove it in court? Thank you.